everybody to this free facilitation webinar, How Engaging Can a Large Facilitated Online Session Be? My name is Martin Galbraith, and with me today, co-facilitating and providing technical support is Sunny Walker of the Virtual Facilitation Collaborative in Denver, Colorado. So thank you for being with me today, Sunny, and for getting up so early to join the session. Thank you all of you as well for joining us in the session today. I'm going to take just a few minutes at the beginning now to talk you through the session and how we'll be spending our hour together. And as I do that, please go ahead and use the poll pods in the middle of the screen, as some of you are doing, to share where are you located and something about your experience in facilitation. And please do continue to use the chat pod in the right to introduce yourself and to chat with each other. So you'll see an agenda, just a very brief agenda in the left of the this screen. We're going to spend a few moments doing introductions, finding out something about who's here. I should also make a special welcome to Illias, Animon and Ruth Mallett from FAO, who were my clients for the FAO conference. That's the case study, a focus of our session today. So thank you, Ruth and Illias, for being with us. I'll invite you to introduce yourselves in just a moment by voice, if you're willing to do that. Then we'll go to the presentation. We have about a 10 or 15 minute presentation, a dozen or so slides, followed by a couple of other documents that you'll be able to scroll through, which present the case study of the FAO online conference, Economics of Climate Change Mitigation Options in the Forestry Sector, which was just a little over a year ago now, in February of last year. Then we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. If you have any questions for me or for Illias and Ruth, or for Sunny indeed, for any of us about Adobe Connect, about the conference, or questions for each other, that'll be your opportunity to ask questions. We're also going to put some questions to you and give you an opportunity to answer questions as well. And all of those of you who have microphones today for voice participation, will be inviting you to respond by voice and also to comment and discuss the text responses that we see. So let me first of all invite Sunny to introduce yourself. Would you like to say just a word or two about yourself, Sunny?
Hello, everyone. As Martin said, I'm based in Denver. I have a facilitation and training practice here and have known Martin for quite a long time through our joint work with the Institute of Cultural Affairs and the top methods. And about 5 years ago, began working with my colleagues in learning how to do something online, and we love it. And so I'm delighted to be here to support Martin today. So enjoy the session. It's great.
Thank you very much indeed, Sunny. And Illias, would you like to say just a word or two to introduce yourself? I've enabled your video. If you'd like to show video as well, you're very welcome to do so.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, Martin. Thank you again. Nice to be with you all. My name is Illias Animon. I was the team leader for this international online conference on the economics of climate change mitigation options in the forest sector, which we organized in February 2015. So I am a forestry officer in FAO. So again, thanks for inviting and nice to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Illias. Ruth, would you like to speak, say a word, or otherwise by text? Okay, thanks, Ruth. Thank you all for your own introductions in the right, and also for your responses to the polls. I see that most of us are from Europe, a few from North America, Africa, Middle East. We actually had 120 people register for the online session. I'm not at all surprised that a smaller number than that is actually here in the meeting room. It looks like that we're 26 at the moment. But it could well be that some others arrive. So thank you for joining. Most of you are somewhat experienced in facilitation by the looks of it. So thank you. Let's go on to the case study. I'm going to move you to our next layout. And for this, I'm going to replace the video with static pictures just to reduce the demand on the bandwidth for the session today. So as I say, we have about a dozen slides here. The slides were actually prepared by Illias following the conference that we worked together on last year. And I've presented a couple of times, we've presented together a couple of times to different groups the case study of this conference. So I'm happy to have the opportunity to take the opportunity to do so again for you today. It was quite a steep learning curve for all of us involved, I think. None of us had done anything quite like it. Although obviously Illias and FAO have done a lot of conferences, and I've done quite a bit of online facilitation using Adobe Connect and otherwise. But this was the first occasion, I think, when FAO had tried to put on such a large-scale conference in an online setting. So it was a great learning opportunity for all of us. The structure of the presentation is in front of you now, like this. I'll talk a little bit about the initial intent of the conference and how that translated to what we actually did. And then we'll move on to lessons learned and what happened after the conference. Following the slides, I've got a couple of documents to show. I'm going to show you the script that I used for the facilitation of one of the sessions to give you a peek behind the scenes, and also the follow-up document, which will give you a lot more background on the content and what came out of the conference. So the goal of the conference was, as it says here, to explore how different interventions could help to mitigate climate change and the costs and benefits of different options, hosted by the FAO Forestry Department. The initial plan was to do just 6 sessions of 90 minutes each, to limit each session to 100 participants, which is the number that the standard Adobe Connect license is able to accommodate. And to limit the sessions to 90 minutes, to take no more than about 18 presentations, essentially because it was a new challenge for all of us to put on such a large-scale event. We wanted to keep it as simple as possible. What actually happened is that we were all delighted and gratified to see how many registrations FAO were able to bring in. And as we got more excited by the response and the number of people wanting to participate, we increasingly wanted to do what we could to try to enable more and more people to participate. So in the end, what we did was we extended the sessions to 2 hours instead of 90 minutes. We still did 6 of them, but we also purchased an additional Adobe Connect license, which would allow up to 1,500 people per session. So there was a bit of a learning curve working out how that was different to the one that we were all familiar with. So in the end, what we had was 51 presentations shared over 12 hours of online time. In addition to that, 126 case study abstracts were shared from 47 countries. So we had about 900 participants all told in the 6 sessions from 114 plus countries. We never had as many as 900 in any one session. I think the maximum was close to 400. But pretty broad spectrum of participation all the same. That was exciting. The structure of each session was in 3 main parts. In fact, preceding these 3 parts, we had an opening, an overview, and some introductions. Each of the sessions, we had a number of presenters and also a few other additional guests as well. So we invited the special guests to introduce themselves by voice at the start of each session, and we invited the 200 to 400 participants to introduce themselves by text and poll, as we've done today. And then we moved into the presentations. We had a keynote presentation for each session on a particular topic of that particular session, followed by a few minutes of questions and answers. Then we had between, I think, 5 or 6 or 7 case studies in each session, with those 5 to 7 presenters available. Each one of them, we gave them 1 minute to present an overview of their case study, and then the participants, the audience if you like, used a poll to vote for which one of those case studies they'd like to hear in full during the session, followed by another 5 minutes questions and answer. All of the case studies had been pre-recorded in advance and been made available in advance on video. So we just watched one of them again during the session, followed by Q&A with the presenter. That led on to what we called a panel discussion, which was an opportunity for the audience of 200 to 400 to put questions and comments by text to all of the panelists, meaning all of the 5, 6, 7 presenters plus the special guests. Questions were received and filtered and selected by Ruth and Illias and their team at FAO, who you'll see in a few moments. And in the FAO conference, I had another colleague, Sheila Cook, who was with us for the last facilitation webinar a couple of months ago. She was working with me on the conference, and she and I put the questions to the panelists and conversed with them. That led on then to the plenary discussion, where we put questions to the audience by text and poll and invited the panelists to discuss the responses that we received. So this session today, in fact, is modeled to some extent on the structure of the conference sessions. Following each of these main 3 sections, we then had a summing up of the key outputs of each of the session, and an opportunity for the participants in the session to share feedback and to rate the session. The content that was shared during the session, as we said, we had 51 presentations, including 31 of 100 and something case studies that were shared. So this is just a little bit of an insight into some of the content that was shared. The feedback was broadly very positive. The challenge at the outset was how engaging could we make such a large facilitated online session. And it was very gratifying that people commented considerably on how engaging that they had found it. The conference team, there was quite a large number of people involved in putting on the conference over several months. Illias and his team in Rome, you can see there Ruth and Illias, who are with us today, plus Sarah, Eros, Marcelo and Johan. The 6 of them were together in their offices in Rome, taking care of all the communications before, between and after the sessions, recruiting participants, taking registrations and so forth, dealing with all the presenters and arranging the recording of all the sessions, all the presentations, I should say, and the sessions, all of that sort of stuff. Sheila and I were brought on as facilitators. We started working with the team, or I started working with the team by having a 1-day visit to Rome in October, I think it was, to discuss and work out how we were going about working together. And then we had a series of online sessions with the team in the run-up to the conference itself. And then the 6 sessions for the conference itself were spread over 4 weeks during February of last year. Adrian Whiteman and Maria Nuutinen were both enrolled by the FAO team from within FAO as advisors to the conference. Adrian Whiteman, I think, was director of FAO Forestry. Maybe Illias or Ruth will correct me on that. And Maria had been involved in a number of other online processes using Adobe Connect within FAO. So some of the lessons that were learned from the conference, and I hope Illias or Ruth may be able to add to these or to clarify. The first was how much cheaper an online conference was to the traditional face-to-face conference, obviously reduced by more than 90%. And I presume that this refers to the cost of previous conferences excluding costs to the participants themselves of their own travel, board and lodging. So clearly, to be able to pull off such a conference as this saves a great deal of money compared to the traditional face-to-face alternative. Also massively reduces the carbon emissions. The distance participants would have had to travel for such a conference, such a number of participants, almost 8 million kilometers. It's worth a lot of trees. We also learned that internet connectivity was not as great a barrier as assumed. Quite a broad representation from around the world in the sessions, particularly from Europe and Africa, perhaps because the sessions were timed in the middle of the day like this, more convenient to Europe and Africa than farther afield. Reaching the unreached, or the harder to reach, of course, is always an issue with any process such as this. Time zones were clearly an issue in reaching people in the Far East and the Far West time zones. You can also see an indication there of how many people returned from session to session, and also the topics of the 6 sessions. What happened after the conferences, there was a conference summary document, which I'll share with you in a few minutes to browse through yourselves. A how-to guide for putting on such online conferences, I think is still in the making or nearing completion. All the presentations were posted to YouTube and remain available on the FAO conference website as well. You'll have links to all of this shortly. Also, there were D groups, online email forums were made available for participants to continue to discuss topics further after the conference. So those are the slides. Before I go any further, let me just stop and see whether Illias would like to add anything by voice, and if there's anything in the chat pod which perhaps I should respond to. Sunny, if you've noticed any questions already that I might respond to, please let me know. Or if any of you with microphones would like to speak, please raise a hand.
Yes, I've not seen anything as yet.
Okay.
But some great participants in terms of their spread and interest and concerns.
Thank you very much. In that case, let me move you on to just give you a glimpse behind the scenes of at least one of the sessions of the conference. This is my script for session 5, which is on the topic of green building. I've desynchronized this, so I think you should be able to scroll through it yourself at your leisure if you'd like to. I'm just going to talk you through it very, very briefly to give an indication of what went into each of these 6 sessions. You'll see that Sheila and I and Ruth and Illias and the rest of the conference team met 45 minutes or so in advance of the start time, as Sunny and I have done today for this session. We had half an hour or 45 minutes of onboarding people, particularly presenters, who had to have their audio set up so that they could be heard properly. And the special guests. We did not offer microphone rights to the general participants. That would have been far too much work to have microphone rights for so many people, and too much risk that would get too much background noise as well as people open their microphones. We started with the welcome and introduced special guests, and you can see we had 8 presentations in this 5th session. We invited people to share who was participating by typing in the pod as we've done today, and by responding to a couple of polls about people's interest in the topic. We had the keynote presentation and an opportunity for each of the presenters to share an abstract for 1 minute before voting on which presentation we would see in depth. And then we had the plenary discussion. Behind the scenes, Illias had prepared a summary of key points that had come out of the presentations and the comments, which I then presented towards the end of the session. And then we had closing remarks from the guests and feedback and questions at the very end. While I leave you to scroll through that a little bit longer if you would like to, let me ask again if there are any questions. Please do go ahead and raise your hand if you have a microphone, or type in the general chat pod to the right. I'll invite Sunny again to let me know if I've missed anything, and I'll take a quick look at what you've been writing too.
Yes, you've had one about how this works with different languages in terms of the content and the participants.
Thank you. One of the things we discussed at the very outset, I think, was how to make, well, obviously, a key thing we discussed at the outset was how to make this conference most accessible to as many people. We've talked a little bit already about internet connectivity and time zones. Language, I'm sure, was also raised as an issue, but it was, we decided very early on that it would have to be in English, at least for the first time. I have done similar work in online sessions in 2 languages where you have translators who can do simultaneous interpretation by voice and also by text. It is possible, but obviously it's a little bit more complicated and takes more time. So in the interest of keeping it simple for our first time of doing it, such a conference as this, we kept it to English.
Adobe can also be set to different languages.
Thank you, Sunny. Yes, can it? Yes, I've not used it with the setting in the different languages, but I'm sure it could be. Yes.
Have run sessions in Spanish where the participants' systems were set up for Spanish. We set up the room that way.
Thank you. And welcome to the newcomers. I see Perry and Stephen and Marlin have arrived, and Vivian. Great to have you all with us. Any of you with microphones, if you'd like to raise your hand, let us know you're ready to speak. If you have a question or a comment, we'd love to hear from you. Please don't be shy. The session will be much more interesting for all of us if we hear more voices.
Yes, Martin, I just, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. Go ahead.
Sorry, I should introduce myself. Elizabeth here. Yeah, I was interested in this language issue, and I'm, given that we often do have to do these things in the, shared language of English, I'm just wondering how much the presenters can be coached to, to speak in such a way to make the language accessible, and also using visuals and, the written text.
Certainly we did encourage the presenters to speak slowly and clearly. Many of the presenters were themselves speaking in a second or third language, in this case, in this conference. Each of the presenters did also use visuals. In order to minimize the risk of presentations being unclear or technical issues with the presentations or technical issues with the presenter's connection to the conference, we actually had all the presentations recorded in advance for this conference. So the members of the FAO team in Rome would meet online in the Adobe meeting room with each presenter one by one in advance of the conference to have them do their presentation in the meeting room, just the 2 of them. That was recorded, converted into a video, and then played back during the conference. So that meant that each presentation could be repeated or re-recorded if necessary. And it also meant that we didn't rely on having a perfect fast internet connection with the presenter in the room at the time of the session.
And Catherine's hand is up.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, please go ahead and open your microphone and speak. Yes, Anne-Catherine, go ahead. I can see that your microphone is not muted, but I'm not hearing you. I'm sorry for that. Thank you, Perry, for your question about qualitative evidence. We do have some quotes in the document that I'm about to move us on to. I agree, online events are never as engaging, in my experience, as their face-to-face alternatives. My experience is that online will never substitute for face-to-face, particularly in terms of trust building, but also engagement more generally. However, if the alternative is nothing at all, then there is a great deal that you can do with online, which is a lot better than nothing at all. And given the reduced carbon emissions and the reduced cost, obviously it's increasingly hard to justify face-to-face, particularly for such large events. I see Stephanie's asking, did we use the whiteboard function? No, we didn't in this conference. One of the technical constraints for having so many people in the meeting room was to limit the bandwidth demands. Using the whiteboard, I think, I haven't actually used the whiteboard a lot myself. Sunny may be able to respond to this as well, but I think the whiteboard would use a lot more bandwidth. For the same reason, we didn't use webcam. For the same reason, we did not have the attendee pod visible to all 200 to 400 participants, because obviously with that many people, people arriving and leaving and changing their status throughout the meeting, for all of that to be broadcast to every one of the participants demands a lot of bandwidth. One of the things I learned myself during the conference actually was that my own internet connection in my office at home was not adequate. In fact, for such a demanding meeting. After the first couple of sessions, my system froze a couple of times during the meeting as I was facilitating, which was embarrassing to say the least. But given that we had a detailed script and we all knew what each other was doing, fortunately Sheila was able to step in and the others were able to pick up the slack and carry on without me until I was able to get my system back up and running and return. So after the first couple of sessions, I actually rented a meeting room in a business center a few minutes down the road from where I'm based, in order to have use of their super fast Wi-Fi there.
And we can pick up now on Anne Catherine's question. She said she was having a time delay, but she's said that most people find networking to be among the highest values of a conference. And did you do anything to substitute for the face-to-face networking on Adobe or through some other tool?
Thank you, Anne Catherine. Yes, indeed. We discussed this. We didn't do a lot, again, in the interests of keeping it simple, not only keeping the session simple, but also keeping the whole project simple for the FAO team. One of the things we discussed at the very beginning was providing some sort of asynchronous forum for people to meet and connect and share with each other in the run-up to the conference and between sessions. We decided not to do that, although we did provide, or the FAO team did provide the D groups after the conference was over, when they had more time to devote for that. I think there would be a lot, well, I'm convinced there would be a lot of value added by such asynchronous networking. And I hope if FAO does the same kind of conference again, it'll be possible to include that next time.
And there's another question about the connectivity and the location of participants. Were they mostly in big cities, or was there decent connectivity in the rural?
I really have no idea. I wonder if Illias or Ruth are able to respond to that. Would you even know whether they were in capital cities or rural areas? Illias, would you be able to respond to that?
Yes, actually we didn't collect that information, but I think if you look at the participation, the continent-wise, unlike people assume, we had a lot of participants from Africa, and to some extent from Asia as well. So we didn't collect the specific information from which location they are, but I presume that maybe they'll be near to urban areas. But we didn't collect it specifically. Thank you.
Thank you, Illias. I appreciate that. I'm going to move us on to look at the final document in the presentation as we continue to take questions. This is the summary report of the conference. It's 66 pages and it's desynchronized, so you should be able to scroll through the pages yourself. You'll find in there details of who participated, some of the takeaway messages from the conference, reports from each of the sessions, statistics about the participants and their feedback as well. The participant feedback is on page 45, I believe. I'm just going to try going there myself to see if I can see anything to respond to Perry's question about qualitative feedback.
And Sonsalis has had her hand up.
Thank you. Yes, Sonsalis, please go ahead. Open your microphone and speak.
Yes, I have a question about the breakout rooms. Have you used them?
Thank you, Sonsalis. We were originally intending to use them. I have used them for smaller sessions. One of the features of Adobe, which is particularly engaging or particularly good for engaging people, is the breakout room. You can have up to 20 breakout rooms in a room of 100 people. So you can break 100 people into groups of 5 to have little intimate conversations. Our original intent was that we would use breakout rooms when we were planning on limiting numbers to no more than 100. One of the challenges of that was going to be ensuring that people were able to hear each other and be heard. It was going to take a lot of onboarding of people at the start of the session to help people get acquainted with the technology in order to make that work. In the end, we decided not to use breakout rooms, partly to limit the amount of the risk of people not being able to hear each other properly, but also in order to enable us to accommodate much larger numbers of people.
Okay, thank you.
And Ben has asked, to what extent did you and your team simulate, test out the meeting load and performance ahead of time?
Thank you, Ben. A lot, to quite a large extent. We had, I think, 2 or 3 online training and practice sessions with the FAO team in advance of the conference week, or conference month, I should say. And then we had a preparatory meeting in advance of each session, if I remember correctly. So we did do quite a lot, and as you saw from the script, we had the procedure for each session mapped out in quite a lot of detail. What you did not see from that script, that was my script, written by me from my point of view, in order that everybody else would know what I was planning to do leading the session. What you really don't see from that is what all the FAO team were doing behind the scenes. Those of you who are familiar with Adobe Connect will know that it has a presenter-only area where attendees with presenter rights have access, but participants don't. So the FAO team were using that presenter-only area to communicate with each other during the session and with me and Sheila. Also, for example, to review all of the questions and comments that were coming in from the participants, and to select particular ones to put to particular presenters. And then they were copying those into the meeting room layout ready for me to refer to when I got to that stage in the process. So when I was ready to put questions to a particular presenter, the questions would be there for me, selected by the FAO team behind the scenes. So there was a lot of work going on behind the scenes, and it took quite a lot of preparation, meetings and practice to make it happen.
There's a question about the use of music and any issues with that.
Yes, thank you. I don't think we did use music in the conference. Those of you who are here early having your microphones set up will may have heard me asking Sunny whether she knew if it's possible to adjust the music, the volume of the music for the whole room. The problem I have with playing MP4 audio files in Adobe Connect is that, as far as I'm aware, it's only possible for everybody to adjust the volume for themselves. So as far as I'm aware, it's not possible to set it at a low volume in order to have it as background music. That, I think, would be quite convenient to make sure that there's no silence when you're testing people's audio in particular. You want to make sure people have something to hear so that they can tell whether they can hear or not. And you don't always want to be finding something to say in order to give them something to hear. I don't think we did use music in the conference, though. I see Perry is asking about using breakout rooms to organize open space. Yes, Perry, I think so, in theory. In practice, in order to the way the breakout rooms work is that either you can set Adobe to automatically randomly assign people to breakout rooms, or you can manually assign people to breakout rooms. So the issue, I think, with doing open space in Adobe is getting everybody into the right breakout room and giving them the opportunity to use the law of 2 feet. I'm not quite sure how they would be able to opt out of the breakout room that they're in and into another one. I think you would probably have to have a team of organizers who would be able to assign people and reassign people to breakout rooms as they ask, I think. I wonder if Sunny knows any more about that.
I would have the same issue as you, depending on the size of the group, getting them into the correct breakouts. But it is an interesting concept that I not actually thought of using it in an open space format. So I think it's one we'll experiment with.
Thank you. Illias, yes, please go ahead.
No, coming back to the use of the music, Martin, if you remember, we used the music once in a while when the participants were responding to the questions. So
you're right, we did.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, I've forgotten. Yes, you're right, we did. There were times during the session when we gave questions to the participants to respond to, and we did play music for a minute or two at that point. Just as background music when we did not want to be speaking to distract them, but we wanted to give them something to listen to. Lucy's asking about the licensing. Yes, I can comment on that. I do have my own license, which is what I'm using now, and FAO also has its own license and had one. It's the standard license, or at least the license that I have, allows for up to 100 participants per meeting and as many meetings as you like during the course of a year. And every meeting, the license holder should be present. In order to accommodate more than 100, when we realized how many people were responding and keen to be involved in this conference, together we looked into what the alternatives were and found that you could buy a license for 1,500. There was also a license for 18,000, I remember, which presumably is used for massive online courses. I don't remember what the other options were. The license that I use costs about $400 US per year. It's a group rate that I have with the US Top Trainers Network, the Technology of Participation Facilitation Trainers Network. So it might be more expensive if you buy one license on your own.
It's about 100 more. I think it's around 500, or at least the last time I checked. There is a question here that Adam's asked a couple of times we didn't quite get to, around with the aims of face-to-face being participation, are there ways you've thought of in an online context to move from engagement to participation? And I know for me, I'd like Adam to say a word or type a word about the difference he sees between engagement and participation.
Yes, thank you. I would as well. I'm going to enable Adam's microphone. And Adam, if you're able to, if you're familiar with Adobe, please go ahead and connect your microphone and speak. Otherwise, perhaps just type in the chat pod, say a little bit more. What do you mean about the difference between engagement and participation? In the meantime, Elizabeth, yes, I've used WebEx a lot also, particularly for board meetings of IAF when I was on the IAF board and chairing. We used WebEx every month for the monthly board meeting. It does do a lot. It's not as flexible. It doesn't have as many features as Adobe. And one of the powerful features of Adobe that you'll have noticed or experienced in this session is that you can pre-prepare layouts with a combination of chat pods, poll pods, note pods, etc., and move through the meeting layout by layout. So you can have your whole meeting set up in advance and work your way through it. Another advantage of how Adobe is set up is all of that persists from meeting to meeting. So you can use the same layout again, or you can create a template from it and then build a new meeting layout from an old one, which is essentially what we did for the 6 conference sessions in the FAO conference. We made a template out of each session and built the new session from the last one, learning quite a lot as we went along and changing things, tweaking things a little bit from session to session.
And while I too prefer Adobe because I find it has more options for participation, the platform Blackboard Collaborate used to be called Illuminate. It was built primarily for education, the education community, but I've used it for a training setting with one of my colleagues from Canada, and it works brilliantly for that, and also has breakouts, and you can do the top sticky wall dynamic using that platform.
That's right. I know ICA Canada use Blackboard Illuminate for their online group facilitation training courses.
Yeah.
Perry's asking about the takeaway messages. Perhaps Illias could comment on that. Illias prepared the takeaway messages for me to read out at the end of each session. I think it came from the presentations and also from the comments from the participants, but perhaps Illias could elaborate on that.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Actually, the takeaway messages we prioritized based on what were provided by the presenters. So the presenters themselves gave us some key messages, and then we watched the presentations, and also, based on all these, we prioritized some of these takeaway messages and passed to Martin. That's the way it was done. Thank you.
Thank you, Illias. Adam, I see is raised his hand. Yeah, thank you, Adam. Please go ahead and open your microphone and speak.
Hi, sorry, it took me a second to figure out how to. I'm not sure what other people might have ideas that they can type in the text about what participation would mean from them, so moving from engagement to participation. But I guess in terms of small group discussions, you're now mentioning things like being able to do sticky walls and prioritization and different things, which someone I think earlier in the questions or in the comments box was talking about networking, so ways of more participants interacting with each other, and also more of less needing to do presentations and asking questions than moving to something which is more participative, if that makes enough sense.
Right. So I don't know if you're familiar with sticky walls, Adam, but and for anybody who isn't, the sticky wall is a tool that's widely used in top facilitation, technology of participation, which is the methodology that Sunny and I specialize in. And a sticky wall is essentially a large piece of cloth that you spray with repositionable spray mount. This is in face-to-face facilitation. and then you can have people write or draw on pieces of paper and have them stick what they've prepared themselves on the sticky wall where everybody can see it. One of the great advantages of that is you can move ideas around and explore relationships between ideas on the cards, and use that as a way to build consensus in a group. The top consensus workshop method works that way. That can be replicated in terms of the technology, at any rate. In terms of the mechanics, it can be replicated online by using Blackboard Illuminate or Blackboard, and you can write virtual post-it notes, and you can have participants write virtual post-it notes, and then you can move them around. You can talk about how they relate, cluster the ideas together, and name the clusters to build consensus or to identify the consensus. So I guess that might be an example of moving from engagement to participation. My experience is that however close the online tool can get to replicating the tools you use in a face-to-face setting, online engagement or participation or whatever is never going to get quite as far as you can in face-to-face. So an online consensus building process, for example, may be adequate for a group that has a relatively high level of trust, a relatively non-contentious and relatively simple topic. If you've got a group with a very low level of trust, very complex topic, and very contentious, then the chances of them building consensus where there wasn't any and doing it online, I think is pretty slim, personally. So like I was saying earlier, I think online it can be a lot better than nothing, but my own view is that it won't substitute for face-to-face. Sunny?
I was saying it can take a while. I'm recalling our very first, as a collaborative, our first big project was with the ICA's Global Assembly, where half of the group were meeting face-to-face in India, and the other half weren't able to be there, so we'd bring them in once a day to see what the work had been, in a virtual setting, and have them respond to what had been done and raise other questions and give some guidance for carrying the work forward. And it took a week, but over the course of that week, I think what surprised me the most was the level of trust and community that was built in the group overall, such that the group made some fairly significant organizational decisions.
Yeah, no, I remember that.
Changes that
I think I would agree, Sunny, that those my experience has been that those who are skeptical of what online participation can do can often be surprised, which is essentially why I called this session "How Engaging Can a Large Facilitated Online Session Be?" I think there's a bit of an assumption that online cannot be very engaging. I think this conference was not as engaging as a face-to-face conference could have been. Frankly, it might have been as engaging as many face-to-face conferences are. Let's not forget many face-to-face conferences and meetings are actually not that engaging. So, you have to be careful to compare like with like.
Yes, Perry made that point.
Do please continue to share. Sorry, Sunny, just a second.
Breakout rooms also.
Do please continue to share questions and comments, but as you do that, I'm going to move us on to the next layout. I see we have just 10 minutes left, so I'd like to invite you to share more of your own experience at this stage of what's worked well in terms of online facilitation and engagement in your experience, and what have been some of the challenges. Feel free to continue typing in the general chat, which remains now at the top right of the screen. But let's see something also of your own experience, and let's respond to that. Illias, yes, please, you have your hand raised.
No, actually, it is to respond to the question about this voting. So if you could just explain how the voting worked in our case.
Thank you. Yes, you'll have another opportunity to see the voting in practice in this meeting room in a few moments. We used the poll pod, which is what we used also at the very beginning of this session. If you were here at the time, we asked people to essentially vote for which part of the world that they were in, or how experienced they were in online facilitation. There's various ways that you can use that poll pod, and that's what we used. We'll be using it again in a moment. Ash was asking, were sessions recorded and viewable later? Yes, they were, absolutely. The sessions were recorded within Adobe Connect, which is what I'm doing also with this session. I believe that these conference sessions were made available in the original Adobe Connect recordings, which allow you to scroll through the pods and make pods full screen and such like. The Adobe Connect recording allows a certain amount of interaction with the meeting recording, as if you're in, well, you are in a sense in the meeting room. It's also possible to record or to convert an Adobe Connect meeting recording into a simple video, which allows no interaction at all except viewing, but it does allow you then to upload into YouTube or Vimeo or elsewhere. I'll be doing both with this meeting. I think both was done with the FAO conference. So some of the things that has worked in your experience, presentations and voting, small exercises, yes. Use of chat box breakout rooms. Good, yes, using the poll pod to collect information, we've also done that. One of the things I noticed in the larger Adobe room that accommodates 1,500 people, I don't think it's available in this meeting room for 100. They have what they call an engagement monitor or something like that, which gives you a sort of a dial you can look at in the behind the scenes presenter area, where you can monitor how many of your hundreds or thousands of people are typing in chat boards or responding to polls, using their voice and so forth. It gives you a sort of a percentage figure and a color representation of just how engaged people are. Using small groups, absolutely, that's good. Yes, bandwidth is a challenge, absolutely. We've had that challenge a great deal in ICA with online meetings in ICA, where a lot of our people are in low bandwidth areas and low bandwidth countries. And I've had my own screen freezing during sessions I've been facilitating, which is embarrassing. But I think one of the things I've learned in online facilitation is you just have to accept that everything's not going to go 100% to plan. One of the things that I remember talking with Illias and his team about again and again and again in the run-up to this conference is what are the risks and how can they be mitigated? Yes, in principle, a lot is possible, and every time we thought about doing something new or something different, we came back with, well, yes, in theory that would be possible. What are the risks of doing that? What are the benefits, but also what are the risks, and how much risk are you prepared to take? And how much capacity do you have to mitigate the risks? Would anybody else like to, anybody else with a microphone, would you like to raise your voice, raise your hand and open your mic? Let's hear your voice if you have a question or a comment on what others have written. We've got just a few minutes left until our hour is up. Yes, Nud, I see you're using your mobile as a backup. I did that as well. We actually had a Skype chat channel open during the conference as a backup. Although if you're using your mobile on Wi-Fi using the same internet connection as your laptop or desktop is using Adobe, I'm not sure it helps all that much, but it's certainly good to take a belt and braces approach, I think. Co-facilitation, Shahina, yes, absolutely. I do always try to work with a co-facilitator if possible, as I am doing today with Sunny. It means that if I crash out for some reason, Sunny can take over. As you've seen, I hope it also means that she can keep a track of your responses and let me know if I'm missing anything. And it also means that if none of you are responding with voice, we can talk to each other, which is a lot more interesting for you to listen to than me just talking to you. Well, thank you all very much indeed for your participation today. We've got just a few minutes of the session left. So I'm going to open our webcams again, or open mine again anyway. Here's another poll pod for you to use. This is another example of how you can vote during a session. When the recording is stopped in just a few moments, I'll invite you to share your contact details in the chat pod in the center right there if you'd like to. You'll see in the bottom right as well there are some web links to the original blog post that inspired this session. The conference website itself, which has all the reports and session recordings, to more free facilitation webinars. My next webinar will be on this at the same time 2 months from now. I think it's the third Monday of the month at 1 p.m. UK time, and next time it will be sharing a case study of participatory strategic planning using ICA's technology of participation strategic planning approach. Let me also mention that there is training available from ICA UK and also from ICA USA in Canada in virtual facilitation. You can follow a link there from colleagues of myself and Sunny. And there's also a link there to Sunny's Virtual Facilitation Collaborative for more information on that. So thank you again. Thank you especially to Illias and Ruth for being with us from FAO today. I'm going to stop the recording now. I hope some of you will join me again in 2 months' time. In the meantime, you will receive a document with a transcript of the meeting by email within a day or two, and links also to the materials that have been shared during the session and to the websites that I've mentioned down here. And in the meantime, if you'd like to stay and continue to chat in the chat pod, you're very welcome to do so. Thank you all very much indeed, and goodbye for now. Thank you, Sunny, as well. Thank you very much indeed for